This is the story of Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran, a 19-year-old farm boy who survived a 4-mile fall from a disintegrating bomber without a parachute, became one of only 3 Allied airmen in World War II to accomplish this feat, and then endured 17 months as a prisoner of war. November 29, 1943, over Bremen, Germany, defies every expectation of human survival. Growing up on a dairy farm near Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, Eugene Moran would watch aircraft pass overhead and dream about flying. Enlistment came the day he turned 18 when the Army Air Forces needed gunners, young men with quick reflexes and steady nerves, farm boys who knew how to shoot. Gunnery training taught him to track fast-moving targets while compensating for wind, altitude, and the speed of his own aircraft, to fire in short bursts so his barrels wouldn't overheat, to memorize the silhouettes of German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190, until he could identify them at 2,000 yards. Training couldn't prepare anyone for the reality of combat over Germany. Picture the loneliest spot on a B-17 Flying Fortress, the tail gunner position, where you're sitting on a bicycle-style seat at the very back of the bomber, separated from the rest of the crew by 40 feet of fuselage. Your only company, a pair of 50 caliber machine guns, and the German fighters trying to kill you. 10 men flew on a B-17. The pilot and co-pilot up in the cockpit, navigator and bombardier in the nose, flight engineer in the top turret, radio operator behind the bomb bay, 2 waist gunners standing at open windows, ball turret gunner hanging beneath the aircraft in a glass sphere, and the tail gunner alone in the tail. German pilots learned early in the war that attacking from directly behind a B-17 put them in the firing arc of only one man, the tail gunner, which made the position a primary target. Catastrophic losses defined the 8th Air Force by November 1943. 60 flying fortresses went down in a single day during the Schweinfurt mission 2 months earlier. 600 men killed or captured in one afternoon, while statistical analysis showed the average crew lasted 15 missions when they needed to complete 25 to go home. Some groups were losing half their aircraft every single month. At 11:32 on the morning of November 29, 1943, Eugene Moran knelt in the tail section of a B-17 named Rikki Tikki-Tavi, watching German fighters swarm toward his bomber during his first combat mission over a heavily defended target. Over 300 bombers had left England that morning with orders to destroy Bremen's factories, an industrial city on the Weser River packed with shipyards, aircraft factories, and submarine pens that made it one of the most heavily defended cities in Germany. 6 flying fortresses had already gone down in the first hour. Rikki Tikki-Tavi took off from Snetterton Heath in England as part of the 96th Bomb Group, and at 24,000 feet the temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero while the thin air made every movement exhausting. When Bremen's anti-aircraft defenses opened fire, black bursts of flak filled the sky, and the bombers couldn't maneuver during the bomb run because they had to fly straight and level. Moran watched a B-17 in the formation ahead take a direct hit, fold in half, and drop from the sky. 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbled toward the factories below when Rikki Tikki-Tavi released its bombs over the target. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to survive the flight home. 200 miles of hostile airspace separated them from safety when the bomber formation began its turn toward England, and that's when Rikki Tikki-Tavi's No. 2 engine took a direct hit from flak, the propeller windmilling uselessly while the aircraft began losing speed. A damaged bomber falling behind the formation meant a death sentence because German fighter pilots watched for stragglers, and a lone B-17 without the protection of the formation was easy prey. Moran saw them coming, a dozen Messerschmitts climbing from below and another group of Focke-Wulfs diving from above, and Rikki Tikki-Tavi was about to fight alone against overwhelming odds. Directly behind and beneath the bomber, the first Messerschmitt came in fast, and Moran pressed his shoulders against the steel chest plate behind him and squeezed the triggers, his twin 50 calibers roaring to life with tracer rounds streaking toward the fighter until the German pilot broke off his attack and rolled away. More followed, many more. Attacking in pairs, the Focke-Wulfs used a simple tactic where one would draw the gunner's attention while the other lined up a killing shot, and Moran swung his guns from target to target while spent brass casings piled up around his knees. These German pilots were Luftwaffe veterans who'd been fighting since 1939 and knew exactly how to kill a Bi-17. Target the engines first, then the gunners, finally pour cannon rounds into the fuselage until something vital broke. From the 4 o'clock position, a Focke-Wulf came in, and tail gunner Eugene Moran swung his guns and pressed the triggers, the fighter's wing disintegrating before it spiraled downward. His first confirmed kill, and he didn't have time to celebrate. Cannon rounds ripped through the tail section, and Moran felt something slam into his left forearm, then his right. Both arms hit, blood soaking through his flight suit sleeves, but his hands still worked and he could still grip the triggers. When Moran glanced down at his parachute, he saw holes in the fabric, multiple holes where cannon rounds had shredded it. His parachute was useless, and if he had to bail out, he would fall 4 miles to his death. Up forward, navigator Jesse Orison remained alive, though wounded, but the pilot and co-pilot were both dead at the controls. The flight engineer dead, radio operator dead, ball turret gunner dead, the waist gunners dead. 2 men still breathed out of 10. Orison in the nose and Moran in the tail, 40 feet of shattered fuselage between them. Another cannon round struck something critical, and then came this sound he would never forget. The shriek of tearing aluminum, the scream of structural failure. Rikki Tikitavi was breaking apart. The fuselage split, and Moran watched the front of the aircraft separate and fall away. The wings, the engines, the cockpit, the bodies of his crewmates all tumbling toward the German countryside 4 miles below. Trapped in a severed tail section, wounded in both arms, his parachute destroyed, 24,000 feet above enemy territory, Eugene Moran was alone and falling. Spinning end over end, the severed tail section threw Moran against the walls while blood sprayed across the interior and the wind howled through torn metal. That's when he did something that defied all logic. Still circling, the German fighters moved in for a closer look, but they flew within range of a wounded tail gunner who refused to die. Moran grabbed his machine guns, though the spinning made aiming nearly impossible. His arms bleeding, his parachute destroyed, falling 4 miles to certain death, and he was still shooting. The German pilots scattered because they'd never seen anything like this. A man in a falling coffin firing back with everything he had. What saved his life was the tail section's aerodynamics. The vertical and horizontal stabilizers acted like crude wings, and instead of plummeting straight down, the wreckage began to glide while the spinning slowed. At approximately 100 miles per hour, the tail section struck the top of a pine tree. The impact snapped branches. The wreckage cartwheeled through the forest canopy, shedding pieces of aluminum with each impact. Moran's head slammed into steel framework. His ribs cracked, both arms bent at angles they were never designed to bend. Another tree, a sideways spin, a crash into frozen ground, then silence. Eugene Moran lay in the wreckage, barely alive. Both forearms showed compound fractures with bone protruding through skin. His ribs were shattered, and a piece of his skull had been torn away, his brain partially exposed to the freezing air. German soldiers emerged from the trees and surrounded the wreckage. Within the hour, they loaded him onto a wooden cart. No stretcher, no blankets, no medical attention, and the cart bounced along frozen roads while every jolt sent fresh agony through his broken body. No doctor came, no medic. The Germans had limited medical supplies and weren't about to waste them on an enemy airman who would probably die anyway. 2 days on a concrete floor while his wounds became infected and gangrene set in. Transportation came on the 3rd day to a prisoner of war hospital, where 2 Serbian doctors examined Moran and made a decision to try to save him. Not because anyone ordered them to, simply because he was a wounded man and they were physicians. 7 hours the surgery lasted, with instruments designed for field operations and almost no anesthesia. They set his broken bones with metal pins and wire, cleaned infected tissue, removed bone fragments from his skull, and attached a metal plate to his head while they splinted his arms with wooden boards. The next 72 hours would determine whether he lived or died. On the first night, the fever came, his temperature climbing to 104 degrees. The second night brought delirium, Moran calling out for his mother, screaming warnings to crewmates who were already dead. The third morning brought the fever breaking. Eugene Moran opened his eyes, alive because the infection hadn't killed him. 6 weeks after the crash, Moran could walk again, though his arms remained in splints and the metal plate caused constant headaches. The Germans processed him. Name, rank, serial number. He was transferred to Stalag Luft 4, a compound designed to hold captured Allied airmen. Thousands of American and British airmen filled the camp, all sharing the same fate: captivity until the war ended or they died. Minimal rations came from the camp-thin soup, black bread, occasionally potatoes, and most prisoners lost 20 or 30 pounds. February 6, 1945, changed everything when Soviet troops approached and German commanders ordered an immediate evacuation. All prisoners would march west on foot. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees below zero. The column of thousands of Allied airmen trudged through snow and ice. Anyone who fell behind would be shot. Anyone who tried to escape would be shot. Walk or die. Later called the Black March, one of the longest forced marches of Allied prisoners in European history. 86 days of walking through blizzards and freezing rain, sleeping in barns, drinking from contaminated ditches, eating whatever could be stolen or scavenged. 1,500 American and British airmen died during the Black March from pneumonia, dysentery, typhus, frostbite, or bullets from guards. Eugene Moran put one foot in front of the other and refused to stop. Every step brought protest from his body. His arms ached from healing improperly. The metal plate in his skull conducted freezing temperatures directly into his brain, and every breath reminded him of injuries sustained 17 months earlier. Daily around him men died. Some collapsed and never got up. Others developed consuming fevers. The column left a trail of bodies across the German countryside. Moran kept walking because he hadn't survived a 4-mile fall to die on a frozen road. Something inside him refused to quit. The same stubborn determination that had kept him firing his machine guns as Rikki-Tikki-Tavi disintegrated around him. April 26, 1945, ended the march when American soldiers from the 104th Infantry Division intercepted the column and the German guards surrendered. After 17 months of captivity, after 86 days of marching, after countless moments when death seemed certain, they were free. 93 pounds. That's what Moran weighed when liberated. He'd entered the army at 150. Military historians later confirmed that only 3 Allied airmen in the entire Second World War survived falls of comparable distance without parachutes, and Eugene Moran was one of them. All 3 cases considered miraculous. The Army awarded Moran 2 Purple Hearts for his wounds, the Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, the European Theatre Medal, and the Good Conduct Medal. December 1, 1945, brought his honorable discharge. Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran returned to Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, the farm boy who dreamed of flying while watching planes pass overhead. He was 21 years old, but had aged decades. A few months after returning, Eugene married Margaret Finley, a local girl who saw past the physical scars and the hollow eyes and the nightmares, seeing the man underneath the damage. Together they built a life on a small farm and raised 9 children. Moran rarely spoke about the war, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone, because the experiences were too painful. 8 of his crewmates had died on Rikki-Tikki-Tavi. Countless friends had perished in the camps and on the march. He stayed silent for more than 60 years. The metal plate in his skull caused headaches for the rest of his life. His arms remained weak, his ribs ached when storms approached, and his body carried the evidence of November 29, 1943, until his final breath. But he lived. He raised his family, worked his farm, watched his grandchildren grow, and outlived most of his fellow prisoners and nearly all of his fellow crewmen. In 2007, the Wisconsin Board of Veterans Affairs created the Veteran Lifetime Achievement Award and chose Eugene Moran as the first recipient. Journalists interviewed him. Historians documented his account, and the silence of 60 years finally broke. Years of research followed, eventually becoming a book called Tailspin, published in 2022. A complete account of the farm boy who fell 4 miles and lived. March 23, 2014, brought Eugene Moran's death at 89 years old. 7 decades had passed since the day German flak cut his bomber in half and sent him tumbling 4 miles toward Earth. A simple philosophy marked his obituary. "I would rather wear out than rust out," the words of a man who refused to surrender. The tail gunner position on a Byte 17 was the loneliest spot on the aircraft, separated from the crew, first target for enemy fighters, last to know if the bomber was going down. When Eugene Moran's aircraft disintegrated around him, he didn't curl up and wait for death. He kept shooting all the way down.